Welcome, everybody. My name is Casey Carroll. I'm an instructional designer here at the Center for Teaching Excellence. I'll be your host and moderator for today, so if you need anything, please let me know in the chat. We will be taking attendance, so please go ahead and add in your name and department and email into the chat, and we can go ahead and keep track of that. If you need anything from us as we go along, please feel free to open up your mic, raise your hand, or use the chat in the box. I will pass over to our presenter for today, Dr. Michelle Hardy, who will be teaching us how to develop our course syllabi.
Thank you. I'm glad y'all are all here today. This is a webinar / workshop that used to be in 2 parts, and I got a lot of feedback saying make it one. I was like, oh, how? So there's a lot that we're going over today. I've tried to summarize it as best I can. You got a worksheet from me. You got a couple of resources from me. One of them is a worksheet that has kind of an outline of what you need to be thinking about. And so we're going to go through the general idea of those particular steps. So what I want y'all to do is thinking about what, if you're teaching a course now, or you know you're going to be teaching a course, or when you want to teach, kind of have that in the back of your mind as we go through today, thinking about what your syllabus looks like, and as we go through these sections, those sections in that syllabus. And so if you happen to have a copy of it, go ahead and pull it up at this point. If not, no worries at all. So what we'll talk about first is looking at what alignment is, whether or not your course and your syllabus is aligned or not. And then how do you actually do that? There's a concept called backward design, which is a very practical way of not only building a course and developing a syllabus, but making sure that the learning that your students are doing is what you want. And so we'll get into that. And then we'll look in more detail into resources that will help you actually build the actual syllabus. And that is like the very last thing. So when you think about putting your syllabus together, often you may think about just put all the content in there. So let me ask y'all, how did y'all, or if you've done this before, if you've developed a syllabus, how did you create your syllabus? What did y'all do? Haven't created one yet? Okay, great. Borrowed from another and changed for my use? Yep. Haven't created? Yep. Okay. Yep. Created the objectives? Yep. Followed the department's form? Yes, exactly. All right. So yes, borrowing from someone else, absolutely. That's the best way, I think, to start when you're not really sure what to do. But then I'm glad you're here, because now you can decide, is this the right way I want to teach the course? So often we think about, what is it that we're going to teach? The topics, the chapters. How do I space it out? When do I put the exams in? Yes, absolutely, borrowed and used a department format. When do the assignments happen? What are all of my policies that I have to include in there? But when you do this, and I am absolutely someone who did this in the past multiple times before I recognized that this was really the wrong way to do this, or at least there's a better way. When you do this, what you need to think about is this course that I have, the one that I've got, whether it's a borrowed syllabus or not, is it actually aligned? And what that means is it aligned to what I'm doing in the classroom, is aligned to what I want my students to learn and what they're doing. And so to be able to do that, to make sure that it's aligned, you use this very practical strategy called backward design. So let's look at how many of y'all have heard of backward design? How many of y'all have heard of that before? Nope. Okay. Ariana, you have heard of it? All right. Yeah, if you've been in education, you may have heard of it. For those of you who have not been in education, you probably have not, because it's not something that, unless you start really looking at the pedagogy of teaching and best practices, this is not something you may have come across. So let's look at what this is. So when you're talking about alignment of a good course that is aligned, good course design, what we're saying is that your learning outcomes, what you may know of as the learning objectives, so your learning outcomes, the expectations of what students will get, is aligned to how they're being assessed. So the mode of assessment, the amount of feedback that they get on their learning, and that is also aligned to what the students are doing, the learning activities they do, and then what you teach and how you teach it. What is it that you are doing in the class? So those three things are all in this interconnected cycle that all should support each other in certain ways. And so what I want to do to help you think about what alignment means is I'm going to give you some examples. So say you have a course where your learning outcomes, your goals for the course are, you want them to learn all the important content, of course, but you also want them to learn how to think critically. So say, for example, you have a activity. So what you actually do in the class, the teaching activity you do, and the activity the student is doing, their learning activity in the class, is just lectures. So where then is the disconnect between what it is you're actually doing in the class versus what it is that you were originally wanting to do? What were your original outcomes or your goals? So where is the disconnect between the teaching learning activity just being lectures when you really wanted them to learn how to think critically? Where is that disconnect? Yeah, so yes, exactly, between activities and goals. So if you're just doing lectures, when you said that you wanted them to learn how to think critically, their activities that they're doing is not promoting that type of learning activity. What you're doing is not promoting the actual goal that you had. Okay, let's look at another one. Writing then, so say you have these lectures, now you're writing an exam, but the exam questions are all critical thinking questions. Where is the disconnect? Which of these three arms is there a disconnect? So what they're doing in class is just lectures, and then the exam, yes. So yes, exactly. So the disconnect is between what it is they're doing in class, yes, and the assessment that you're giving them. So they're not doing in class things that will help them learn to develop those critical thinking skills. So then when you assess those skills, they can show that they have developed those skills. So let's look at the third one, writing an exam with just understanding questions, just basic knowledge questions. Which of these lines, these connections, is disconnected from the other? Yeah, learning and assessment. Good. Is there another one? Learning, assessment feedback. Yep, you see another one there. Really, it's learning. It's also learning goals and the teaching and learning activities, because they're not getting that critical thinking that you wanted them to do, both in the assessment as well as in the activities. Yeah, the goals don't align. Exactly. So this is what we mean by a non-aligned course. What is it you're wanting your students to do to be able to take away? Are you actually teaching that and getting them to do those things in the classroom? So the way to ensure that you have an aligned course is to develop your syllabus backward. And so this concept has been around for quite a while. But when we say syllabus being developed backwards, it's with respect to perhaps convention, where you're just used to putting everything in the schedule, fitting everything in, hoping it works, but also the end result of what the students are actually going to be able to do. So the first thing is, what do I want my students to be able to understand? So those goals and those learning outcomes are the first thing you want to think about. How do I know that they have learned? So these are your assessments that you're going to do. So have they learned those goals and those learning outcomes that I have? What would be the activities that they do? And how do you teach it in order for them to be successful with those assessments so that they do achieve those learning outcomes? And then the content that will help support those learning experiences and your teaching activities, that they can then achieve the assessments and their learning outcomes. So the backward design is, you don't start with the content, you start with the results that you want. Starting with the end in mind is the idea behind this. And once you know what those results are, work backwards to get to that point. Okay. And this is not necessarily something that you automatically, oh, I can do this, I can work this through. This is something that it takes a little time to get into the habit of thinking this way. So totally accept that that is the way it's going to be. That's totally fine. I always, whenever I look at my syllabus each semester, I rethink through this, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I rethink through, is my course aligned? Am I seeing that there are some assessments or some activities that are just not working? So when you use the backward design process, whether you are developing a new syllabus or you're revising a syllabus that you have or that you've used, what results is that your student learning is very well defined. You know what it is they're supposed to learn, they know what it is they're supposed to learn, and therefore, because you have that very concrete goal, it's easier to assess. I know I want the students to learn this, therefore this is the assessment that I will use. It's not this nebulous, oh, I want them to think critically. Well, let's be very specific in what we want them to be able to do. There's better alignment, as I said, and as a result of it's clear of what you want students to learn, you get better student learning because it's very specific as to what each assessment does, those end results that you are wanting students to take away. And if you're online, it helps you to really think about what your priorities are for your course, maybe rethink your assessments through the online perspective, the online lens, whether you're asynchronous or synchronous or perhaps blended. This helps you to really think through, is the course the way it's structured now working for this particular delivery method? All right, so on your worksheet, so you have a PDF that is a worksheet that has lots of little steps. So it looks like this. So go ahead and pull that up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through these multiple steps and talk about the basic aspects behind what you need to be thinking about. All right, so you want to, first of all, the very important step, think about your class, resize or size up the situation. How many students do you have? What is the delivery mode? How long is the class? What the room setup is like. Is it a lecture hall versus movable chairs? Who your students are and perhaps their motivation. Are they majors or not? Are they graduate students, undergrad? Do you have perhaps night school, Palmetto College, adult learning, first generation students? What is their prior knowledge? Is there prerequisites to this course? I'm teaching a course right now that is a 500 level, 700 level course that unfortunately it's geological oceanography. Unfortunately, there are no prerequisites for it. So I have gotten students who are non-majors for some reason, bad advising, I don't know, in the course. So it's made me completely change how I've approached the course as a result of that. It's been a struggle, unfortunately. What role does the course play in the education? So is it a prerequisite? Is it an elective? Is it a senior level course versus a freshman level course? Is it Carolina Core? Those are important aspects to think about when you're designing the course, the outcomes, the assessments, what you do in class. Is it going to be a course that's more theoretical or practical based? Are they developing skills? Is it very hands-on? Is it more of a creativity skill development course? So those are the things you want to think about. And then what is your comfort level in teaching the course? Because this will be something that you're going to have more of a time intensive course if it's something you're not comfortable with. And so you need to be able to factor that into thinking about what assessments are you able to do? What level of depth can you go into? These are, again, things you want to think about with that particular course. So that's like the demographics of the course. All of these impact your assessments that you use, the activities, the teaching strategies that you use, and the expectations of your students. And that's a very important part of it. If you have non-majors and you thought you were having majors, my expectations had to change drastically as a result of that. So those are things you want to think about. And I didn't know that until I saw the roster like 2 weeks before. I was like, oh dear. So anyway, these are things you have to think about. All right, so step 2, determine what your results are. What do you want your students to get out of it? The goals, whether it's standards that you have to reach for your particular discipline. What is it that are your goals for the students that you have, not the ones that you expected? So what are your priorities then? Do you want students to learn something? What do you want them to take away? What skills do you want them to have developed? Perhaps thinking strategies, abilities, mindsets, or values. All of these are important things. It's not just content. It's all of these kind of higher level things that you also know that's important to you, that you value it. And so you want to make sure you fold that into the, not just the content, but into the assessments and the activities that students do. Are those goals that you have, are they linked to the lifelong learning of the students that they're going to take away from your classroom? They're going to remember it. It's a key skill or a key understanding, fundamental knowledge that you want your students to take from the course. What are those? And so those are what you want to think about first before you start developing the assessments and such to test those types of things. So I like this phrase, what changes do you want to see in your students? Is it a thinking style of change? Is it a perspective change? Is it growth mindset types of change? So all of these are important things that you want your course to do. So there is a really great white paper that was put out in 2003 that is basically this in much more detail that we're talking about today by D. Fink. And he's a really great educational developer that I've met before. He's just a very friendly, congenial guy. And he developed this white paper about how to develop a course with backward design. So he had this diagram that I just thought was a really great way to visualize what is it you want your students to take away. What are your course goals, priorities? So there is the entire textbook or whatever it might be, everything that would be nice for our students to know. However, we know that there's reality. There's also what is important of that circle. There is what is important to know for them to be able to do those skills, those abilities, those mindsets that you want. And then there is also this enduring understanding that you want to make sure if students take away anything from the course, these are the key things I want them to take away. So when you design a course, you cannot do all of these, but what you can do and what you need to focus on, your goals for your students should be what's important to know and do and the enduring understanding. Okay, so when professors talk about, I have to teach the whole book. Well, no, you can't. So that's why you need to rethink what your priorities are in what students are going to learn and have those skills that they can take away with them. So then if they need to go back to content, they have the skills and the knowledge and the theoretical understanding to be able to do it. So in step 2 in your worksheet, question 2A and 2B are talking about what are those goals. So when you go back and you start developing a syllabus or your course, thinking about what are your overarching goals. So thinking big, you may need to reinvigorate the course, reinvent the course. So Fink in that white paper also talked about something called significant learning. And he had this really great way of visualizing it where it's not just the content, but what are the value systems that you want them to develop. So learning how to learn, application skills, integration, caring, feelings, a human dimension, learning about yourself and others. These are what he called significant learning. So you want to think about in my learning outcomes that I develop and also in the activities that I design, the assessments that I design, am I folding these aspects of significant learning into them? So that's something to keep in the back of your mind as you're developing them. So use this. This is called the taxonomy of significant learning, all these different categories basically. And this will help you to think about what are my goals? Do they address any of these at all? They don't have to address them all, but there are some that are important to you and to your discipline. Do those learning outcomes and what you're doing in class address those particular significant learning goals? So let me ask y'all, which of these, of the 6 that you see here, and there may be others that you can think of, which ones are really key to your discipline? That if you're revamping your syllabus or writing a syllabus, the learning outcomes, which are ones that you want to make sure that you fold into what you do in the class? I mean, obviously there's foundational knowledge, but what else? Application, yep. Application, yep. Integration, yes. Human dimension, yep. Perhaps if you're teaching freshmen, teaching them to learn, how to study, how to be a good human. Yes, caring in human dimension. Exactly. So again, these are the things, yes, how to learn. These are the things you want to start having in the back of your mind of what are my end results that I want, that backward design process. Yes, caring for sure. All right, excellent. Now, when you're thinking about this, part of the course syllabus requires what we call student learning outcomes, and I will call them SLOs here. They also may be listed as learning objectives. The proper terminology is outcomes because it's more student focused versus an objective is a thing to achieve by you in your class versus a student learning outcome is what the student is achieving. So these are measurable statements, and I'll talk about what measurable means in just a second, but it articulates what students should know, be able to do, and value. Those of you who have been in K through 12, you've heard knowledge, skills, abilities, very same thing. So what it is that students should know, be able to do, and value as a result of finishing, completing, going through your course. And they have a particular structure because that structure helps you to design the assessments and the activities to achieve them. So there is a student will be able to, so it should be student focused. There will be an action verb that they're going to do, some type of cognitive process, which I'll get to in a second. And then there is that learning statement, that object that they're going to achieve with that cognitive process. So it might be learning, it might be a skill, it might be knowledge, it might be a human dimension aspect, any of those. So this way of developing this learning outcome, good learning outcomes, use this structure, and the action verb comes from something called Bloom's taxonomy. And so Bloom's taxonomy, I'm not going to go into detail here. If you're interested in more, I can give you some resources as well as some webinars that I've given that are more detailed on it. But Bloom's taxonomy basically just gives you the verbs that you need to use that should be part of that learning outcome statement that reach that level of thinking that you're wanting. So in this taxonomy, these categories, you have what we call lower order thinking skills and higher order or critical thinking skills. And so remembering being your most low order. So you see here, you're given verbs that will help you when you write learning outcomes or when you write assessments, which we'll see in a second. These are the verbs you would use to get students to reach that particular level of thinking. So if you're really interested in students being able to evaluate, the verbs that you would use in your learning outcome or your assessment would be something like justify or support or present or argue. So in your packet that I gave y'all, I have a couple of resources for you. I have the resource that gives you a whole bunch of other verbs as well. And there's all sorts of these resources online. I just particularly like this one. So level 1 recall, level 2 interpretation, level 3 problem solving. So higher level learning. And then of course, diagram that I just showed y'all is here on page 3. So when you're writing learning outcomes, this would be a good, and I had, like I said, many others as well. This would be a good thing to go back and say, which of these verbs might be best when I'm writing that learning outcome. When faculty are writing their learning outcomes, I often see or I hear them ask about, I seem to have too many of them, or I see that those learning outcomes are really narrow, where literally a learning outcome is achieved in 2 days worth of classes. Because typically what you see is in a syllabus, there should be between, and this really does vary by discipline, but between 5 to 7 to 8 or so learning outcomes. If you have like 10 or 11 or 12, those are pretty specific. And there should be a way for you, just to make it easier for you, to put those into a little bit greater, larger category of thinking processes and category of topics and content. So if you do have too many, consider those to be actual class session topics rather than an actual course learning outcome. And perhaps those, so perhaps a class session aim. And then you can use those class sections to sequence towards the end result of those 4 or 5 classes. What is the end result that I want students to be able to do? That will then be my learning outcome that I put into my syllabus. If you have too few, perhaps think about those as course topics or weekly topics or unit topics or modules, and you can develop one or two course learning out or student learning outcomes from each of those as well. Okay. So with your learning outcomes, they need to be student focused. And so the structure that I showed y'all will help you to make sure they are that way. So it's not what you're doing, it's what the students are doing. And it should be focused on what their learning is, the skills that they're developing, resulting from what they're doing in class. So it's not the students will write a lab report. That's the activity. You want to make sure your learning outcome talks about what the students are going to get from it. Students will be able to develop thinking skills or develop interpretive skills or something like that from writing from the assessment. So in that case, you wouldn't even mention the lab report. You would mention what is the skill, the ability students will develop in the course. Yes, thank you, Casey. Appreciate you. Analyze key pieces or analyze key aspects of reporting scientific information, something like that. But your learning outcomes also need to be general enough. So you can't have, like I said, 20 learning outcomes for each week. Those are too specific. They need to generalize the overall learning that students are getting. But they also, you may say, well, this seems to be conflicting. I promise it's not. I'm going to show you some examples. They need to be specific enough that it gives you an idea of how you can measure that learning of that particular student learning outcome. So it basically leads you to a way of how you can teach it and how you can assess that particular learning. So let me give you some examples of what we mean by measurable learning outcomes. So these are from some examples of some music courses. Measurable would be apply an understanding of stylistic trends through listening, oral recognition, and analysis of samples, of sample works, or evaluate the impact of past musical developments on present day music practices. So those you can kind of think about if they apply an understanding, perhaps they listen to something and then they from that, they're able to interpret what types of style is being illustrated in that particular music sample. Or if they're evaluating the impact, what are the different trends that you hear, historical musical trends in a particular work. And those are things that can be evaluated pretty easily. Some that are not measurable, though they're great things to have, but they're not measurable, is exploring global and cultural diversity. How do you measure exploration? Agreed, Casey. So I personally don't love including understanding, maybe apply stylistic trends. Yep, agreed. So yeah, it's a great way of looking at the crafting of learning outcomes. So exploring, how would you measure exploring global and cultural diversity? What would be a way to quantify that? Or develop your musical understanding and awareness? How do you measure development? So instead, you want to think about what verbs from Bloom's taxonomy would better be able to allow you to test for or assess that particular skill or that particular ability that you want in your students. And so that's the beauty of Bloom's, is it will help you to do that. And then it will help you to figure out, and this is how I can assess that. This is what the students will do in order for them to achieve that. Okay. So once you do that, so questions 2, C, D, and E, let me go back to this. So you have, let's see, 2. You've looked at your learning outcomes. Are they measurable? You then also now, once you have your learning outcomes, you want to then think about, are they good or not? And so what you want to think about is using in your packet, I've given you a nice way to kind of evaluate your learning outcomes. Are they student-centered? Are they measurable? Is it appropriate for the course? How many are there? Does it identify an assessment or activity? So this is kind of a way to assess whether a review checklist assess whether your learning outcomes are good ones or not. So doing that, as you're looking at your learning outcomes and you write them or you rewrite them, look at whether all of my learning outcomes, are they all at level 1 or 2? And this is a senior level course. Maybe I need to rethink what I want students to get out of the course. Or they're all in just one learning taxon. They're all remember, or they're too specific, perhaps. Do they only allow for activities that are just face-to-face? What if you had to go online for a reason? God forbid that we ever had to do that. Or it allows you for flexibility or not. That's something else you can keep in mind if there's a way to do things, if it's an online activity or if it's something that can be modified easily. Those are things you can think about. Step 3 is now taking those outcomes of what you want students to do and figuring out how to assess them, to rethink perhaps your assessments of what you're having students to do. So how do you assess those outcomes or those aims, those weekly aims, or that overarching goal? Okay, so we're now here in feedback and assessments. We were looking at the learning goals. Now we're in feedback and assessments. So thinking about how we assess students will then give us the way that we have students work through that material to achieve that assessment and how we teach them to do that. Again, we're doing backward design here. So what will students do to show that they've learned that material or developed that skill? What is the product that they're going to be providing you or showing or turning in, whatever it might be? And when you're thinking about these assessments, assessments design is a whole workshop in itself, but you want to think about, are my assessments auditive or educative? So what we mean by that is auditive is like an audit for a tax audit. You've turned everything in. Let's look at whether it's right or not. If it's right or wrong, that's it. You're done. Versus educative is formative assessments where they're learning as they go. They're learning the skills while they're being assessed at the same time. And so it is also what we call authentic assessments, is what we want it to be, where it's putting these things into this knowledge or these skills into real life contexts that they're going to see in the future. And so they're learning it as they go in that real life authentic context. That's what we want assessments to be. Doesn't mean they all have to be that way. Sometimes you do have the auditive, the summative types of, exams, midterms and such. But for really, truly good learning to happen in your classroom, you want to try and strive for as much educative, authentic assessment as you can. So Bloom's helps with this. I love this. So this is called this is a verb wheel. It's a verb wheel both for the levels of Bloom's. So that's in the blue, the domains of Bloom's. The yellow is the verbs. So here's some more examples of the verbs for those 6 levels. And in this one, this wheel gives you ideas for assessments at those different levels. So basic knowledge, level 1 of Bloom's. Here are the verbs. These are some great assessments that students can do that will achieve that level of thinking. Say you want analysis. These are the verbs that would be used either in the learning outcome, but also in the assessment itself, the assignment, the questions that you give them in these types of assessments. So I like to have y'all think about it in this perspective, because it helps you to visualize, first of all, someone's already done this work for you to think about how do I write an assessment to get at application level. Here you go. And here's some examples for you. So use these types of resources to help you even think of new ideas of how to develop assessments to do the learning, get students to do the learning you want them to. So there is a researcher that has done research and put together a series of these taxonomy circles. And so I wanted to show y'all this. So it is here. So on his website, he has taxonomy circles for multiple types of thinking types. So, and like I said, I wanted to show you all this website, but let me go to this next slide here. So here's an example for, this is the taxonomy of the verbs and the assessment forms for the cognitive domain. but he also has those for not just cognitive, but also the affective domain of thinking, so growth and feelings, emotional areas, as well as the psychomotor, motor skills, manual skills, physical skills. And this then helps you with developing, thinking about assignments, assessments that you can use. How would you design them? What would you do? And so he has these things available for you to look at. He also has the knowledge domain itself. So this is a different way of types of knowledge. Is it process knowledge? Is it abstract? Is it conceptualized knowledge? Again, here are your learning outcomes. These would be the verbs, and then these would be the assessments. So saying again, someone's done the work for you. So use these resources to help you think about new ideas for assessments. Okay. All right. So I want to show you some examples of how you can rethink your assessment options, what ways you can rethink of what is the purpose of the assessment, why am I having them do this, how might I change this. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. So say, for example, you have an assessment that you want to make sure that students are doing the readings. So you have an assessment on the readings every day. Which of the following, A, B, or C, would you likely try? So would you perhaps have discussion questions and have students answering the groups? Perhaps you would develop an in-class assignment worksheet with interpretive questions, or would you have an assigned quiz on the readings that perhaps they would do before class? So y'all tell me which one, A, B, or C, would you perhaps do if you were developing this type of assessment for your class? A, okay. A or B, okay. When you're looking at these examples, and these are just 3 examples, yeah, I agree. I'm not crazy about C. I like A and B because they're more formative types of assessments. When you're looking at, you as the instructor, thinking about these variations that could be done, you want to think about the purpose of it. So first of all, is this assessment actually addressing a learning outcome? Is it a formative or educative type of assessment? Is it encouraging deeper reading or thinking, or are you just having them complete check-in and using it for check-in and checking on learning, attendance, and participation? So if it is more for deeper reading and thinking, that's going to be a different design of an assessment than one that would be just for check-in and checking on learning. So again, it's helping you to really rethink your design of your assessments and also ensure that those assessments are achieving some of your student learning outcomes, of those thinking skills and abilities that you want them to take away from the course. Not just the knowledge, but the deeper thinking, the critical thinking, the close reading types of skills. Okay, let's look at another example. You want to do an in-class check for understanding during lecture, for just this formative incremental check-in. Which option are you most likely to try? Perhaps use a follow-along worksheet with questions turned in at the end of class, perhaps create a post-lecture exit ticket or quiz, or maybe create an embedded quiz lecture, questions in lecture, which is what I do. I tend to do that. Which one would y'all do? And it varies by discipline in the course. So which one are you more likely to do? C, okay, C, yep. And I've done A before. It just depended on the content that I was wanting students to be able to do or work with. Yeah, A or C, yep. I have follow along worksheets where I have them work through concepts as we go through it, so that I'm not waiting till the end of class perhaps for them to do it, or taking it home and they don't remember anything. So this is more of a formative. So with this particular example, is it achieving a learning outcome? Is it achieving a learning outcome of a skill development, not just knowledge building, but skill development as well? Again, is it check on learning? Yes, for sure. Stats is very good for that. Or for attendance, if it's for attendance or participation, is it really necessary? Is it something that's actually achieving more than just attendance and participation at the same time, actually helping with their learning at the same time? What level, cognitive level, are the questions addressing? Are they worthwhile questions, or is it kind of busy work? So those are things you want to really rethink, making sure the assessments that you use have a purpose, perhaps a dual purpose, of achieving what you want students to be able to do and take away from your class. So when you're revising, relooking at, reevaluating, developing your assessments, it's also really important to make sure it's manageable for you. You can have this really beautiful exam, or not exam, assignment. And I'm thinking about a course that I taught a long time ago that I bombed that course that I was teaching. I didn't do a very good job now that I look back on it, where I had students looking at data of all these ice core data and chemical changes through ice cores. And I had them analyzing the data, but just the practice of analyzing the data. I didn't get to bigger picture type of things. And so I wish that I had known more about how to design assessments, because whenever I got their data back, it was overwhelming with the amount of things I had to look at and comment on and double check on them. So it became unmanageable for me. So you need to think about that. That's an important aspect. Of all of those options, they are all effective in some way, in some perspective, all valid. It just depends on what the course is, what it is you're wanting that particular assessment to achieve, your comfort level, your students' comfort level with technology, whatever it might be. So those are things that you think about with your assessments. So again, there are many right ways to do this. What is it? What process, what tool, what strategy will allow you to assess students to see if they're getting that learning that you want them to get? Now, a quick note on using technology, and you have this what's called a pedagogy wheel, but you have this in your packet. But tech is a great opportunity to have interactive, engaging, authentic assessments, because they're going to be using this in the real world. You know, there's a website that I saw the other day where you actually can graph equations, like algebra equations. You type it in and it will help you learn how to graph them online. I was like, that's much better than a TI-80 calculator. So that ages myself quite a bit. But the key with tech is, well, and also it helps them develop their competencies, because they do need to know how to do this. But the problem with tech, you have to make sure that the assessment is not the tech itself. Tech is just the tool to get them to achieve that learning or that skill or that ability in a way that they're going to be using in the future, not just learning how to use that tech. So this resource, this particular website, let me go, here. So here we've got, this is a little bit old, but it still has a really good summary of, this is all summarized by the Bloom's taxonomy levels. And so for iPad apps, these are levels, these are the apps you can use if you're doing an assessment at the applying level or the analyzing level. There's also Android, and there's also online tools. So using things like Padlet for evaluation, Twitter, Sway for applying, all sorts of different things, okay? And I'm sure y'all can think of many more that can be used. Yes, I have not used Notion, but I have heard of it, so I need to explore that one a little bit more. Now, so with the assessments, again, going back to your worksheet, thinking about where you are in this process. So question number 3, looking at your assessments, do they align? Are they aligning to your outcome? So are your assessments actually achieving what you wanted them to achieve? Are they measuring larger goals or just checking content knowledge boxes? And are they auditive or educative? Are they actually getting students to learn as they go? And if they are just auditive, how can you perhaps change them? Okay. So yeah, what products, what information can you gather? So these assessments are this information that will tell you, are they achieving those outcomes? Is the course aligned? Are the outcomes and the assessments aligned to do what you want them to do, the students? So the next step, just as important, is how are you going to grade and provide feedback? This is very important with the assessments that they do. Are you going to be able to have the time to provide that feedback? So what are the criteria, are the standards? How are you going to assess them or judge them based on perhaps disciplinary or discipline-specific standards, or a rubric, whatever it might be? What are the traits, the characteristics of high quality work for something like this? Your grading system that you use should reflect the learning outcome and the activity. So you can have different levels of grading and feedback of your assessments. It could be very specific analytic, so you're grading for specific components, or it could be just an overall or holistic assessment. Are you using point scales or letter grades? All of these are different aspects that you want to think about for each assessment. If it's an assessment that is just for checking in, then you just need perhaps a check minus, check plus. If it's something that is really getting at specific details where there's specific aspects that students need to be able to do, perhaps it's a more complex rubric that has point scales that you associate with it. How much weight do those assessments do they give for the actual overall course? So for example, if students are putting in a lot of work on a project, but it's only worth 10% of the grade, really rethink that percentage that that assessment should be given weight-wise for the course. But then you also have to think about, like I mentioned earlier, do you have the time and bandwidth to be able to grade, give feedback on all these different assessments that you might be doing daily in class? So again, this is important to think about with your syllabus. Step 5, the actual activities that students do. How are they going to achieve the learning that the assessment shows that they have achieved that learning? So what are the students going to do to demonstrate that they've achieved the learning goal, to do well on the assessment? So is it problem set, working on problem sets? Is it writing an essay? Is it rough drafts? Those types of things. So when you have a good learning outcome and good assessments, there should be some type of, hopefully, active learning or in-class learning or working with other students, not just reading and memorizing, but something active to get them to achieve that good learning that you want them to do. So not just passively receiving lecture content. So not just sitting in class listening, what are they doing with that in order to do well on the exam or on that assessment that you do? So some questions to ask yourself. What are the learning activities that will get them to be able to do that learning? So I wouldn't necessarily, for example, if I want students to learn how to write a lab report, I wouldn't just have them read about it. I would actually have them do that and actually go through the process of writing a lab report. So are they just getting information ideas? Is that what you want them to do? That's part of the learning that they're doing, is how to access that type of information. Do you want them to actually experience doing something in some authentic setting? Maybe it's case studies, problem sets, role playing, whatever it might be. Are you having them do reflective dialogue? We're really thinking about the purpose of doing things. We're really working into deep, complex, critical thinking types of skills that they're developing to determine whether or not they understand something. What is the significance of learning this type of thing? So you really want to think about, what is it that the activities are doing to get them to achieve the learning that you want? Thinking about, should you revise an activity? Maybe you have an activity that just hasn't worked and you're like, I know something's not right. Ask your students to give you feedback on what they thought about that, your past students. You may think that ones that have worked have not, and your students will give you that information. Are there activities that are just really not necessary? It's just kind of busy work. Making sure that those assessments that you do, the activities that students do, all serve a purpose, perhaps serve multiple purposes, whether it's learning knowledge, but also learning to work in groups or learning to reflect on and give feedback to other students. So good learning experiences in the classroom, outside the classroom, can help you do that. So here's an example of really rethinking and revising a learning activity. So this is back pre-pandemic, and this was something that I had been doing for several years in my marine science honors class. It's a non-majors, but it's honors. And so I would have them write what I called a position paper, where they took a controversial topic and they talked about what it was, why it was a controversy, pros and cons, all of that sort of thing. And so then the pandemic hit. And I was like, oh, I really don't want to read, students are kind of frustrated with having to write papers for like all of their classes. So I had a student say and ask me, do we have to write a paper? And so I was like, no, you don't. So what I then did was I revised it for us now being online. I said, no, you know what? You don't have to write a paper. You can do a project. You can do a PowerPoint presentation, an infographic, a flyer, booklet. You can do a paper, which I probably got a third of them were still papers. But I revised it so that they could do and show their learning the way that they wanted to, that was best for them and their particular skill set and their particular way of learning. And this really worked well. So I continued with that for a while. And then I went, so this was another thing that I then added to that. So not only did I have them do that, but then I asked them to submit those to me. And then I had students, as a part of, I believe it was their, on their exam, they then had to review a couple of the students' projects that they presented, whatever it might have been, if it was a paper or a presentation, summarize it. What was the other side? What was a possible solution or course of action? And so this then allowed me to do the learning where I didn't want them to just know about one topic, but multiple topics of controversies in marine science. So this was finally getting at what it is that I really wanted in the first place, was learning about all sorts of different controversies and pros and cons of each side. Okay. And then I revised it again. So this was them doing this on the exam. And I was like, that really is, I think it makes them a little bit more stressed to do that. And so what I have now started doing is I've got students doing those presentations, developing some type of project, but then the students, all of the students choose from a set. So sets 1, 2, and 3 are kind of grouped based on topic throughout the semester. And then they write a discussion they choose 3 of them and they write about those 3. So those are then distributed throughout the semester so that it's not all on an exam, but they're given time to do it without having to compromise studying for the exam. So now that's what I do. So they get both an assignment grade for the actual presentation or project and an assignment grade for discussing those topics that they were interested in about pros and cons. And that's what I'm doing currently. So lots of variations just from experience, but also really rethinking what was the purpose of this. Not just the activity of writing a paper. No, I want them to learn some skills, but I also want them to be exposed to different controversial topics. And this was the best way to do that. So step 6, choosing what you're doing. So notice we are now on step 6, and it is now finally about you. Only now. Before, it's been what the goals for the students are. So what is your role? How do you help students achieve that outcome and be able to do that assessment? So thinking about how can you in your classroom have time, how can you free up time to allow for activities, those activities that you want students to do to happen. So that means that how you're presenting the material. Are there other ways to do that? Do you have to lecture? Can you give them short videos? Are there readings they can do? Is there website content? Is there something you can post in Blackboard? So yes, this goes towards what we call the flipped learning, but flipped learning doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be the full class content. It can be just little snippets that they watch or content that they can address or read through before they come to class, or even in class, like they watch a video and then they do a part of an assignment in class. So what is it that you can do? How can you change things up in what you're doing in class to help them achieve those learning outcomes and be successful in those assessments to be able to show what they can do? Okay, how do you facilitate those activities in the classroom? So this is your role, your teaching role. So this is in your handout, your steps. We've talked about the assessments, the learning activities, and then reviewing and revising your teaching activities. Okay, all right. So step 7 is now let's make sure that things are aligned. Is everything that we've just been talking about, are these components aligned? So the situational factors, the demographics, basically, the learning goals for those particular students that you have, the assessments that achieve those learning goals, and the feedback that you can give, that you're able to give, and then what they're doing in class, the actual learning, or outside of class, and what you are doing to facilitate that. So are all of those aligned? In your packet, you have on page 5, me scroll down here, some what we call course design worksheets. So there's a couple of different examples here. So this helps you to kind of visualize that. Here's your learning objectives. What are the assessments that I can use to achieve that type of learning? What do I do? What do the students do? And here are some important things to make sure students have. So this is a way for you to visualize and plan out this backward design, this alignment that you want to make sure that your course has. Okay. So that's page 6. There is also one that maybe is better for if you're an online course, so you have learning outcomes. Perhaps it's designed in a module format, or it could be in person as well. Here are the module learning objectives. What are they doing? What are the activities that they're going to do? What is being achieved in each of those modules? Okay. So those are just some good templates for you to use in order to do your alignment. So do they all support each other? Do they all connect to each other, this alignment? Are there actual assessments and activities that are achieving each of your learning goals? Or is there something you're actually not doing that you said you were going to do in your learning outcome? So this helps you to see that you're missing something, okay? All right, now we get to structure the course, sequencing the course. So there may be, if you can identify major concepts or topics, general overarching topics, and thinking about how do I get to make sure that the students are going through the thinking process and skill development in the correct order. So what was the first thing that they need to do? What has to come before others? What skill building needs to come before other ones? What activity would be then best to follow that one or build on that? How would you then, what would be the best one to conclude? Whether it's the activity they do, the assessment they do, what's the best way to conclude that? So this now gives you a time sequence of how these all fit relative to each other. And of course, there is a template to help you do this. This is called the Castle Top template. And so this is also from Rethink. And so this is, so the castle top being like your turrets and all of, so major topic 1 in course. You may have 7, you know, it may be that you're with your course, it's a survey course. You may have 1 a week, or you may only have 3, but in class, what are they doing? Out of class, in class, out of class, to make sure that then, and these could be assessments, these can be learning activities, teaching activities that then achieve the learning outcomes for that particular topic. And so you also have a template for this in your packets that is similar to that. So week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in class, between, and you can see that you can, you know, do all sorts of different variations on this depending on how you want to visualize your particular course. Okay. Making sure, the other reason I really like this strategy and this particular template is that it helps you see, are you doing the same thing every day or not? Is there variety? And are you building the complexity over the weeks? Is the complexity building? Is the challenge building? Is that depth of knowledge building up to that end product that you're wanting? So these types of templates can really help you visualize that. So you want to do this week by week, or yes, very good point. Are you giving too much work? And I discovered that in the course that I'm teaching right now, the geological oceanography course. I had students who were like, there's too much going on at the first of the semester. And they were absolutely right, because I didn't visualize it as well as I thought I did. I thought I was pacing things out well. I did not. So I had to kind of shift things around. So yes, that's a great point. So do this week by week for the entire term. And so this helps you make sure that the assessment that you're using, the activities that you're doing, build to that knowledge. They're not extraneous. They're not too much. There might be something missing. Again, it's a great visualization. Now, debug. This comes in, what comes into this is kind of getting an idea of what has and hasn't worked in the past, kind of asking around what would be, if you tell someone that you're doing this particular type of assessment or activity, have y'all done this? Did it not work? What were some problems with it? Do you see, looking at your syllabus and looking at the structure of your course, do you have activities aligned with each other? The assessments are consistent, or are things that just don't fit? They just really stand out like a sore thumb. What situations might arise as you implement activities. So is something so fundamentally, some assessment so fundamentally based on, say, like a field trip, that if they miss the field trip or there's a hurricane and you can't reschedule, what happens? So that helps you to kind of rethink what is an alternative that I can implement if something does happen, okay? Does the design that the students are doing, so going back to the castle top, does this encourage student engagement and involvement, community building? Do the students get feedback? Is there time for you to give that feedback, or is there too much going on? So again, helping you think about kind of troubleshooting what might be a problem. So will the students have the time to do the work that is supposed to be done outside? So there's a great resource that is a course workload estimator. And again, your resources packet has all of these links, but you can, this is so cool, y'all. You can go in here, how long is my class? Perhaps if they have reading, how many pages per semester, how many discussion posts per week, page density, genre, are there drafts, other assignments, different types of assignments. And so you don't have to put stuff in all of these, but you can, so how many exams. And then once you set whatever your assessments are, you can then have it calculate for you the actual workload per week, independent, but there's contact hours. So very, very cool way to save you time and help you really assess what the workload is for your particular course that you have thought that you had designed well, and discover that students are reading 500 pages a week. That's not working. Okay. Now, also do really think, thank you, Casey, do really think about getting feedback yourself on the course and your performance, not just with student evaluations, but looking at how students did on exams, how they did on the assessments, perhaps feedback that they did or they could give you, did this really work? Like with the example of the project, students were like, do we have to do this? No, you don't. So that's good feedback for you to really assess your effectiveness of those activities, of those assessments. Perhaps you can do midterm assessments where students give you feedback during the middle or after every assessment. Did you like this? Was this helpful? You can absolutely ask those questions, okay? And then step 11 is finally, you're like, oh my gosh, finally putting the syllabus together. But again, there's templates for you. Don't reinvent the wheel. So on page 10 in your packet, you have a checklist, syllabus best practices. This is from the CTE. So these are some, the asterisk is required. So the asterisk things are, yes, required and must be included. Those that are not asterisk don't have to be, but even better than that, so that's a nice checklist, but even better than that is that the CTE has templates for you. So our syllabus templates, oops, let me go back to that here. We have templates for whether you have a face-to-face course, whether you have an online course or a blended course. So these templates are ready for you to download and pull up, and we have edited it. Thank you. We have edited these and annotated them of what is important, what you need to include, how you should change it, examples. We have also, this has just been posted. We also have examples of, let me scroll down here, academic integrity. We've made some edits, and then generative AI. So options of how you can talk about whether AI is permitted, acknowledge it. These are, again, are ways that you can talk about it in your syllabus, the wording that you can use for that. So these templates are there for you. We also have for summer and fall already the course templates. So perhaps you are a Monday, Wednesday, Friday course in fall. Ooh, I just saw an edit that needs to be done. So I'm going to save that right there. So when you pull that up, this is the schedule template itself that has links to the holidays, final exams, all of the dates available for you for fall, but also summer as well. Okay, use our templates, save yourself time. That's what they're there for. We also, so all of those are available. That Casey just put that link in. We also have important sections. So when you are required to put particular sections in your syllabus, we have links to that wording that actually the offices have provided for us. So academic integrity, Here are some different things that you can do or include in your syllabus, technology requirements, all sorts of different examples of, let's see, where was the other one? Let me collapse these. So for example, what do you say for counseling? What would you put in for inclusivity? We have the verbiage for you to copy and paste and put into your syllabus. Okay. So also recommend asking other people who have taught this course, looking at other syllabi, getting some feedback. Is what you've done, is it good for that course? Do they see any issues that might be a problem with that syllabus that you have written? Okay. Of course, if you're going to be teaching here, you are going to be on Blackboard. So CTE also has the opportunity for you to get a UCV template. So we're putting our courses into UCV. If you want a template to help guide you in the design of your Blackboard UCV course, you can go to this website and you can ask for a sample course to help you start putting that together. We also have tons and tons of resources on Blackboard UCV of developing your course. So just going to this website will give you all sorts of resources on UCV, along with many workshops that we're having throughout the semester and throughout the summer. Some final takeaways. So this is a work in progress. This is going to take time, especially if you're developing it from scratch, but even the revising, rethinking, realignment, give yourself the time to do that, to make that course a better course. Thank you. Have realistic expectations, like we have already talked about. Is this enough? Is this too much? Is this something that can be achieved? Prioritize what you want students to take away from the course, the key ideas, habits of mind, key things that students in this course should take away. Use strategies and tools that are manageable and effective and accessible to other students that you can do that are usable by you, but also being flexible, being willing, like I showed you my example, willing to change things, giving students options as to what is better for them to show their learning, perhaps flexibility in deadlines, whatever it might be, but you still have to be able to manage. And then use those resources that we've given you. So at the end of that packet, you have a resource links. So I've highlighted the CTE Learning Outcomes page. We have pre-recorded webinars. We have syllabus templates, syllabus examples, and Blackboard UCV help, sandbox course requests. That's the design course for you that helps you set yours up, and many, many other resources that you can explore at your own schedule. Okay. So I know that was a lot, but I'm on time. I'm very proud of myself. I hope that this was helpful for you.